Yo, what's poppin'? I'm here today, this evening, with a look at the strength of schedule for all of the NA teams. APAC, of course, not having to worry about that with the round robin, but NA, it's a bit of a hot topic at times, and you see a lot of, oh, they had an easy schedule, oh, they had a hard schedule. Actually, you don't see the hard schedule one as much, surprisingly. But yeah, so I just wrote up these numbers beside the teams. The number being the amount of points their opposition had in total. So the people that the San Francisco Shock played had 12 points between them. And the average of this, like what would be considered a average schedule, is 18, like the Washington Justice have, because if every team was to go even, right, 3-3, 3 times 6 is 18, right? So that's how you get that number. So average schedule 18. And what does that mean for these teams who had an easy schedule, who had a rough one? So easy schedule first. The easiest one being Florida with 11, and then San Francisco Shock with 12. After that, it goes to 15 with Toronto and Atlanta. And then Dallas Fuel have 17. But those are the only teams below average. And with Dallas Fuel schedule, one below average, I'd call it average. So the only teams I would say had a for sure easy schedule would be Florida and Shock, right? And now the question with that becomes, well, are they actually in this placement in the standings, right? Is Florida actually number 4 in NA? Is the Shock actually number 1? With the Shock, number 1 or 2 for sure, right? They beat the Glads. If they don't have that win against the Glads, it kind of, you have to have some question mark if they're in the top 2. But because they get that win, and because of how good they look, even against maybe the lower level teams, like think of it like this: a third of the points of their opposition comes from the Gladiators. So between the 5 matches that weren't the Gladiators, 8 of them have, like, there are 8 points between those 5 teams, which is kind of crazy to think about, right? But does that mean does that mean they're not number 1? Maybe they're number 2, but that's as low as you can really put them, just because of that win, of how much credibility that win against the Gladiators gives them. Moving on to Florida, 11 total, right? And the thing with Florida is, let me look at their played matches. Their best win in the standings is against the Washington Justice, number 8, right? They lose to Atlanta and they lose to Houston, and then they beat the bottom 3 teams. So for Florida, it really is a big question. You have to question it. They beat the bottom 3 teams. There's only 1 point between those bottom 3 teams, and they don't beat Houston. They don't beat Atlanta. Now the thing with Atlanta, they did look good at the beginning, but it was before people figured out the Doomfist comp. So if they rematch Atlanta, which they are going to be doing, maybe they win that one, which I read them to, right? But there's no certainty of if Florida's actually that level. Like we haven't seen it. We just haven't seen it. So yeah, that's that with Florida. So Florida basically, for sure, the biggest culprit of easy schedule. Like they're the team you can make that argument for the strongest. The other teams, the only other 2 relevant ones here would be Toronto and Atlanta. They're 3 points below average. I think you can kind of make the argument, right? But it's definitely not like as prominent as Florida. Let me quickly look at their matches real quick. Yeah, so Atlanta, the best team they beat is Florida in the week 1. So you have to question it with Atlanta, right? Really, like, and of course they kind of fallen out of favor. I'm trying to combine those, but and for Toronto, the best team they've beaten is Houston, Boston, Houston for sure. So Toronto have a little more credibility than Atlanta, in my opinion. But I don't know. Maybe there's an argument to be made with them, but I would say it's not as real as Florida, right? But maybe there's a case. There's a case for Atlanta for sure. Maybe there's a case for Toronto. I'm gonna think about it. Moving on to the other side of the spectrum, the who had the hardest schedules of the season of the stage. So Paris Eternal have a 26, which is outrageous because the next closest is Houston, and you could say, oh well, they lost all their games, so of course they have less points. If they went 6-0, it'd still be 20, right? It'd still be as hard as the Gladiator schedule. That's crazy, right? Like the Paris, like if Paris like get their shit together, next stage, it has to be an easier schedule. Like it can only go up from here in terms of schedule, really. Um, Now, does that mean Paris is not a team worthy of going 06? I wouldn't say that. I don't. I think it's just unlucky they had the hard schedule. I think it's good for them they had the hard schedule when they look this bad, right? Because now if they get better, they have more winnable games probably. So that's good for them. You can say, oh, they had a hard schedule. That's why they're 0-6. I don't think so for this team. But it is good news actually. Moving on to the other teams. Now I'm done with Paris. You have Houston at 22, New York at 21, Gladiators at 20, and then London, Boston, and Vancouver all at 19. Of course, with Washington Justice having the perfect schedule, like looking at the point wise. So the 19s, you can't really call that a hard schedule. It's one above. At 20, you can maybe start thinking about it. But then you see Gladiators play both Shock and Fuel. Half of their points came from those two teams of the opposition, right? So, can you say Gladiators had an easy schedule? Yes, but they played the top two teams in their region. So, no, you can't. It doesn't work as well. Now, New York. Is there an argument to be made that New York's schedule was harder than, and maybe they're not a team that deserves 1-5, right? Is there an argument for that? Looking at their matches real quick, they only beat Vancouver, right? And they play Gladiators, Atlanta, Shock, Florida, and Toronto. You can make an argument here. If New York play Boston, do they win? Do they beat against? Do they win against Washington? Do they win against London? All valid questions. Maybe there is a little bit of a strength of schedule thing for New York. That's a possibility. I think it should be acknowledged a little bit, but in the end, they still definitely look like, just looking at watching the matches, right? They do look like the third worst team. Maybe not. Maybe Washington's worse than them. Maybe Washington's worse than them of late. Maybe they could have beaten the Atlanta Reign of late. I don't think so. Atlanta more than Washington, I don't think so, but it's not all doom and gloom for New York Excelsior fans. It really isn't. I would consider that a hard schedule for a team that finished bottom three. Sure, let's call that hard. And now I will move on to Houston. Probably the most impactful team regarding a hard schedule. The other ones are at the bottom, right? Houston maybe has more of an argument here. Who does Houston play? They played Dallas and they beat them, right, in the first week. They play Toronto, they play Shock, they play Florida, they play London, and it is not updated on Wikipedia who their team they played last weekend was. Who was that team? I don't remember who that team was. I have no clue. No idea. Couldn't tell you. Regardless, sure. Could you argue this was a hard schedule for them? Well, they played Shock in Dallas. Kind of has to be a hard schedule, right? They do win. They do beat again. They do win Dallas. Like, they beat Dallas. I can't speak, but I think you can still argue a hard schedule here. They don't play any of the bottom three teams. The only team they play that I see, I don't know what the other one was. Wikipedia is not updated, and it's too. Well, I guess I can quickly look on the schedule, but they play teams in the kickoff clash, right? It's the only team that that isn't in it is London, who was looking strong, right? Who looked who look good, who's been looking better, right? Their rush style has gained more credibility. They played Paris. Okay, they do play Paris in the end. But yeah, I think there's an argument for Houston that said they had a hard schedule, and maybe they could have went 5-1 if they had an easier schedule. If they have a schedule like Dallas, do they go 5-1? Maybe. I don't think so. Maybe. But if they have a schedule like Atlanta, do they go 5-1? Maybe. Those are things to consider. But overall, I'm gonna say teams with easy schedules that you need to look at. Florida, it's the biggest one. Florida, Atlanta are my two biggest. You can throw Toronto in there if you want. Teams with hard schedules that are worth looking at. Houston. And as it goes for outside the kickoff class, you can look at New York. I think so. Those are the two teams I think were impacted by a hard schedule. But yeah, so I would like the Mickey Mouse. Oh, these teams didn't play good competition thing to kind of stop for the most of these teams. This is what it's pretty close except for a few outliers. And if a team like Shock beats the Glads, maybe not worth calling them Mickey Mouse in my opinion, because they just beat the Glads, right? They have to have at least there's some credibility to where they are in the standings just off that win. Anyway, that's gonna be it for me. Maybe a little longer of a video than I intended, but it was good. So give it a like, give it a subscribe. More videos like this coming. Kickoff Clash coverage, I guess, is gonna start. I'm gonna be reviewing the game still. I'll do the matches, the previews of the matches a little bit going into the future rounds. I just did my bracket, so check that out if you want. And yeah, have a good one.